I want to say a few words on the sad passing of George Foreman. Um, if, like me, you're a boxing fan, although I should say on and off, I don't follow the sport religiously, but I'm a long-standing um, fan of the sport, and I've always had an interest in it. Um, then someone like George Foreman is, a huge, huge name. Um, he died at the age of 76. No cause of death was released. But I think it's fair to say he's one of the biggest figures in the sport. Um, he's always been among my favorite fighters. I've always found him to be a very interesting figure. Um, with his passing, I watched again the movie Big George Foreman starring Chris Davies. It's a film that didn't get a lot of attention really, but it was good. Looking at it a second time, I think actually it's a pretty good film. I think Chris Davies done a good job in the role. Also starred Forrest Whitaker. Um, there's a lot that could be said about George Foreman. Boxer, entrepreneur, preacher. And I think that film actually, no film could really summarize a man's life, but it's uh, it's good little insight to, I guess, the sort of person George Foreman was. Um, back in the 70s, he was one of the most feared athletes in sport. He was one of the hardest punchers in boxing ever. There's a long-standing debate over who hit harder, Ernie Shavers or George Foreman. But generally, if you have any debate about the hardest punchers in boxing history, it's guaranteed that those two names will be pretty near the very top. There's other guys that get into that conversation, like Vitaly Klitschko, Mike Tyson, Rocky Marciano, sometimes cited, and there's other names among heavy hitters. But certainly George Foreman is up there. Um, he had a record of 81 fights, 76 wins. Very impressive record, 76 wins and 5 losses. Foreman took part in one of the most famous fights of all time against Muhammad Ali, the Rumble in the Jungle, 1974, Kinshasa, Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo. The brainchild of Don King. King is rightfully a very controversial figure, rightfully seen as a very controversial figure, but as a promoter, he had skill. Has to be said, he had skill. Um, that fight, obviously, it was before my time, but it was one of the most hyped fights in history. Um, I think of the Johnny Walkerland song "In Zaire," um, and then the Fugees also had a song about the Rumble in the Jungle. It was almost more than a boxing match; it was a historic event. Um, and Ali definitely he toyed with all his opponents, but as Foreman entered the ring, he famously won with the rope dope. That is to say, Ali was an average puncher. He wasn't a massive puncher, but he tired Foreman out. There was actually fears that Ali might die in that fight, that might have died in that fight. But he, of course, won with the rope dope that just caused Foreman to have exhaustion. But that event, losing to Muhammad Ali in the Rumble in the Jungle brought Foreman into a real depression. In the movie, it shows actually he was involved in something called the Job Corps, which is sort of a semi-military, something like the Peace Corps, but focused on, um, I guess, underprivileged youth. So I don't know that much about it, but it sounded like an interesting program in the Lyndon Johnson years. Foreman won an Olympic medal in the 1968 Olympics in Mexico City. And, throughout much of his sporting life, even though he became a very iconic figure afterwards, it seemed he couldn't catch a break because um, even when he won an Olympic gold, he didn't really get credit for it because a lot of the black community were looking to the black power athletes, Carl Davies, and the other guy's name eludes me, but Carl Williams, I think it was. But even then, Foreman didn't get credit. Ali taunted all his opponents, including Foreman. Rather distastefully, Ali said, "Ali Bumbaye, Ali, kill him," literally. Foreman also made a mistake of bringing, I understand, When We Were Kings, a documentary. It showed that Foreman brought his pet German shepherds to Africa, and that was a mistake because Congolese saw that as reminding them of the colonial era. But anyway, he fell into a depression after that fight because imagine coming on a 40 fight winning streak and then losing to Ali. And he just wasn't the same fighter afterwards. He then lost to Jimmy Young in 1977 and retired. Incredibly, he came back. But for me, it's not so much that he came back. Many fighters have tried to come back. It's the fact that he came back and done so well. So 1987, um, he came back for Steve Zuski, won that fight. Um, but significantly, 1994, I believe it was, he fought Michael Moorer, 26 years old, very talented fighter. To be fair to Michael Moorer, I don't think he should just be remembered as the guy who lost to George Foreman. He was one of the best fighters of the 90s, one of the best heavyweights of that era. A pretty talented fighter in his own right, so that should be considered. But yeah, at the age of 45, George Foreman became the oldest heavyweight champion ever. And that story is inspiring enough. But then outside the ring, he was someone who really stood up for his faith, became an ordained minister, became a very successful entrepreneur. A lot of sports people dabble in other things, but without making much success. Foreman actually was successful. He was a successful businessman. The George Foreman grills sold in their hundreds of thousands, I believe. Um, an interesting man, George Foreman. He was born in Marshall, Texas. I believe he died in Texas. All his sons were called George. But certainly for me, I have no problem putting George Foreman easily in the top 10 heavyweights. Um, Absolutely. I mean, I think his career speaks for itself. Like any long-term career, not all of his fights were exceptional, but the things that he achieved, becoming the oldest heavyweight champion ever, he was an inspiration. A great man, and definitely one of the best heavyweights to ever lace up gloves. And he was modest about it, but he really was. I absolutely put George Foreman in the top 10. Um, so rest in peace, big George Foreman. You inspired millions.